Salvage, a story by user Rantarian. Chapter 51, Road to Hell. Adrian still could not believe that the Kelsey Fleetmaster had actually gone so far as to give them a ship, albeit a small one, just so that they could fly away in it. He had to hand it to Jen for convincing old Big Bird to trust them, for making him believe that they were all actually on the level and willing to do the job he was employing them to do. Big Bird wasn't a complete idiot, and he was obviously hoping to get a lot more out of them than he put in, but it still must have required some smooth talking. The ship itself was well maintained and well provisioned, but it wasn't large. It had an FTL drive and enough room for a dozen people, if you didn't mind doubling up on the 6 bunks. But what it did lack was space for a decent amount of food. Hardly a surprise, given that aliens seemed to eat about as much food as a large hamster, but still damned inconvenient. They'd still taken the time to lay a false trail, however, and had made a first warp to deep, unmapped space before changing direction and pushing on to Cimbrian. If Big Bird was running some kind of underhanded plot, it wasn't likely, but it wouldn't pay to underestimate him. There wasn't much use in giving him any kind of information he didn't need to have.
"Ah, I'm telling you," Jen said chirpily. "It's a palace. It's even got a whole big room for this incredible bath."
"Oh? And would this bath be big enough for 2, by any chance?" Adrian asked her, and the look on her face told him that she was imagining the same things he was. There was, after all, a lot that could be done in a bathtub that wasn't washing, and this would be their first chance to everything.
"That sounds a lot like a high-class CFL birthing retreat," Askett mused. "They keep those big pools to lay their spawn in, and keep them there for incubation. The water needs to be pure and kept at a constant temperature for the mix to gelatinize."
Adrian turned back to look at Askett while Jen stared straight ahead, tapping her fingers on her console just like anybody might when they've just heard something they didn't want to hear.
"Yeah, mate," Adrian said to Askett. "I'm sure that's what it sounds like, but what it actually is a really nice bath."
"I'm a big girl, Adrian," Jen said tersely. "I can handle the fact that I've been taking wonderful baths in some sort of alien slime breeding vat that spawned God knows how many goo monsters." "The CFL themselves aren't actually made of goo. They just secrete it to protect themselves against impurities in the water they're in," Askett explained. "They're also peaceful and herbivorous, so for a human to be calling them monsters is beyond ironic." "That is honestly the most disgusting thing I could imagine has been in my bathtub. That is honestly the most disgusting thing I could imagine has been in my bathtub," Jen told him. "You can stop talking about it anytime you like. Do you know that?"
The navigation sensors clicked for attention, and received it.
"We're about to drop back into normal space," Adrian announced. "No problems with the field. Not that I'd have any idea what to do about them in a bucket like this."
As if on cue, the small vessel dropped back into normal space above the verdant world of Jen's description.
"Here we are," she said, flashing them a grin. "Time to send a fair hello."
She turned to the communications console and tapped in the few commands needed to link to the planetary receivers.
"Hello down there. This is Jennifer Delaney, beautiful, intelligent, back from the brink of death."
"Ever so slightly full of herself,"
Adrian put in. Jen shot him a teasing grin.
"Who've I got down there?"
She waited a moment, still smiling for whatever reply she thought would be coming. Then she waited a moment longer, and then another, but the silence on the airwaves persisted. She frowned and tried again.
"Cimbrian, this is Jennifer Delaney. Answer, please."
"I've just done a sensor scan," Askett announced, his voice grave enough to tell them what he'd found, even without knowing the details. "It isn't good."
"Send to mine,"
Jen said, requesting the same data. It seemed she'd picked up a few phrases in her time amongst the aliens. "Sending now," Askett replied. "Orbital structures show signs of having been systematically destroyed. Somebody didn't want a reclamation team to make much use of it."
"No,"
Jen whispered, her eyes widening at the rest of the data.
"The palace? It's gone?"
"Signs of orbital bombardment," Askett added. "The whole structure is in ruins. Lots of burned-out vessels down there as well."
"I'm taking us down," Adrian told them. "There might be survivors."
"From this?" Askett asked, but went silent at the glare Adrian gave him.
"There might be,"
Adrian reiterated.
"I'll have us down there in a few minutes, Jen."
Jen nodded, her face in her hands. She was starting to break again, and it was hard to say how much more she could take before she broke completely. She'd already taken more than a lot of people needed, and sometimes it was easy to mistake old scars for strength, when all they meant was that once upon a time, a little part of you had died. Adrian took a deep breath, not sure what to say.
I'm not good at times like this, he admitted. I don't know what to say, or I say the wrong thing and everybody thinks I'm some kind of arsehole. They might be right, but the people down there, some of them were my friends too, and I'm not going to just give up on them without being sure. And if they have come to harm, Jen, well then I will find the people who have hurt them, and I will fuck them up. And then I won't have to worry about them hurting anybody else I care about.
Jen looked up from her hands when he had finished. Tears were welling in her eyes, but the softness in them was notable by its absence.
"There's just one thing you're wrong about, Adrian," she said, her voice hard. "It'll be both of us fucking them up."
Cimbrian. Herbiter had watched the departure of the remaining pirates from his little cave, not really comprehending the finality of their departure until the orbital bombardment began. It hadn't stopped until presumably the orbital defenses had run their ammunition feeds dry, and by then half of the night had passed. The pirates did not return, but Herbiter took the opportunity to investigate the ruins. The palace, which he had thought it rather more likely to be a CFL facility, had been entirely obliterated, and along with it, all vessels and stockpiles on the surface. Here and there were some fragmented remains, and in places the Alabenolan suits stood silent watch over a destroyed landscape. It was, in a way, testament to their ruggedness that they had continued to stand through the bombardment, although, had any of them suffered a direct hit, Herbiter doubted that they would have remained so. The suits were built to last, but they weren't built to last through a strike from a starship's coil bolt.
"Well, Herbiter," he muttered to himself, "this is another fine mess you've gotten yourself into. Stranded alone on a Class 4 planet with practically no tools and no prospects of a friendly starship coming by."
He was, as Adrian would have put it, royally fucked. The only way it could ever get worse would be if the damned hierarchy decided to launch their second wave and cook him like they had done half of the pirates. 2 days ago, he had located the corpse of a Ruaher female in a burned-out tree as he'd been foraging. An unpleasant discovery. The Ruaher weapons designer had been a pleasant individual, brilliant within her field, and had always treated Herbiter with respect. She had not deserved to die like that. In Herbiter's considerations, nobody did. But he was sure it was not a random killing. To have found her out here, they would have to have been searching for her specifically. There were signs of the body having been destroyed before the trees had been burned, torn open for whatever reason there might have been to do such a thing. That meant something. Herbiter was sure of it. None of the other pirates had been treated in that manner. Only the Ruaher. When he got off this planet, he'd have to start investigating that. If he got off this planet. It wasn't looking good, unless he expected to completely build his own starship. But Herbiter didn't put that level of optimism in his ability to transform a garden planet into an industrial powerhouse with only his own 2 hands. Herbiter hadn't even bothered to try. Instead, he just moved his camp to the shattered remains of the palace, and waited for rescue or for death. When the Kelsey personal transport arrived, it seemed as though the latter had arrived. When Adrian Saunders and Jennifer Delaney stepped forth, he still didn't think his chances were all that good. Adrian smiled broadly upon picking him out from all the broken ruins.
"Herbert," he called out, "you're about the last person I'd have imagined surviving all this. Can we offer you a ride out of here?"
It had been so long since Asket had been around another Kortai. He had begun to forget that he wasn't the only one. In real terms, it had only been a few weeks since they'd left Kavaris, with its extensive Kortai population. But in personal experience, that time had stretched on forever, sitting around the dinner table with a disgraced Dominion counselor, who smelled of woodland creature was therefore somewhat confronting. This had been the powerful man who had plucked Asket from the little prison cell that had been his to rot in, and had given him work to do. The same powerful man who had very nearly started a corporate war and forced a government crackdown on the corporations. Now he was nothing. Less than nothing, in fact, since Asket could find no reasonable thing the Kortai counselor actually contributed to anything right now. Perhaps he had some sort of hidden ability beyond being good at politics? One could only hope.
"Trix is dead?"
Adrian asked, plainly distraught by the news. Jen seemed equally so, but now neither of them showed sorrow. There was anger there, though, as hot as Asket had ever seen it burn. But somehow, while they were together, it did not explode as it usually did.
"Tricror was, I believe, purposefully murdered,"
Herberder told them. Her body was torn open. Only her body.
She once told me she had all of these designs stored somewhere safe,
Jen said after they'd sat pondering this information for a while.
Could she have meant inside of her body?
That's as good an explanation as any we're likely to receive, Herberder admitted. It means that the hierarchy...
The hierarchy? Askett interrupted. The one from all those conspiracies.
Less fictional than I would have hoped, Herberder said flatly. You only need to look around to see the kind of influence they have. All of these ultrasuits with Alabenalan troopers. How much do you imagine that would cost? A price equivalent to a mid-sized planet is how much.
Askett thought over all of the information he had parsed in his younger days, back when he couldn't get enough information to quench his thirst for knowledge. Even back then, the conspiracies about the hierarchy were like those that children tell each other. A secret organization in charge of everything, and in possession of advanced technology. It was absurd, and yet the evidence was irrefutable.
Sort of like the Illuminati on Earth,
Jen had said, when the details had been explained to her.
Except they really don't exist, I think.
It's impossible, though, Askett stated. How can an organization like that exist without the knowledge getting out? And for how long?
Well, Adrian mused, you have heard of it before, right? But if they've wrapped the details up with enough bullshit, it gets hard to tell fact from fiction.
Are you suggesting that they've put the information out there themselves? Askett asked testily, then thought about what he was saying. Because that would be brilliant. You could control the official story, make it something nobody but crazy people would believe.
That is also my measure of it, Herberder replied. There is no way for me to release my information without everybody thinking I've gone mad, as well as being a wanted criminal.
We're still going to need a way to fight them,
Adrian said.
We can't let them do whatever they want to us. They need to pay.
Jen nodded fiercely, and Askett was a little disturbed by their combined eagerness to throw themselves at such a powerful organization in the hope of inflicting some harm.
You'll recall what happened the last time we threatened them, Herberder replied. What you'll receive is a reprisal an order of magnitude greater than what came before.
They're not invincible,
Adrian said.
They didn't like it when we were trying to bring the war to an end, so we just need to help bring the war to an end. That's a place to start.
You just need to help bring the war to an end, Herberder asked, bemused. Unless my estimation of your abilities are gravely mistaken.
When I was working for you,
Adrian sharply interrupted,
I had to do things a certain way. That is no longer the case.
We can use the disaster here, Jen added. We tell Big Bird that we were responsible for all of this. We work with the Kelsey until we find a way to strike back.
You're suggesting that I work with the Kelsey?
Herberder asked aghast.
I was a Dominion war counselor. I was the leader of their enemy.
And now you're a defector?
Jen informed him.
Earth wanted this planet for their own. They wanted to make me their colonial governor. We should still do that.
But everything here has been destroyed, Herberder protested. What could they possibly...
This planet is in the far reaches, right?
Adrian asked.
Out of the way enough for it to go unnoticed. We show Big Bird the wreckage. He goes away happy that the problem has been dealt with. And everybody else finds out that everything that used to be here isn't around anymore. That means nobody is going to be looking for anything out here.
Where are the others, though?
Jen wondered.
You said they left, so they must have gone somewhere.
Herberder sighed.
I don't have any notion of where they could be. They left me behind because I was too busy hiding from everything that was going on. They must think I'm dead.
We'll find them, Jen,
Adrian reassured her. He was sure they would, since he doubted that they'd just give up and go home after successfully repelling an invasion like this. They'd clearly destroyed everything they couldn't take with them as a big fuck you to whoever came looking. And those weren't the actions of people who'd just run back home.
Until then, we'll have to lean on the Kelsey to get us what we want, she replied. We have to get a wormhole beacon if we want any kind of help from Earth.
We need to get a message to Earth as well, then,
Adrian added. It was hard to avoid making his complete disdain for the idea too apparent, but it was an entirely unavoidable necessity, and it didn't matter whether he wanted anything to do with Earth or not. Jen frowned at him, troubled eyes locked with his.
One day you'll tell me why you don't like Earth.
He nodded, and took her hand in his. He smiled at feeling the difference, in size and in roughness, even with her recent calluses. Hers were dainty by comparison.
One day. Soon. I promise.
Adrian turned to look at the bemused pair of Kortai sitting across from them.
So,
He said,
start by telling us how we steal a wormhole beacon.
Aratus, Kelsey heavy cruiser, low orbit of Cimbrian. The results of his experiment were so far beyond what Kaziz had hoped for, he wasn't sure what to do. The Kelsey Alliance had sent his fleet out to deal with an unparalleled pirate menace, and technically he had done that. He just hadn't used the fleet to do it.
Absolutely everything has been destroyed, he murmured to himself. Even the orbital defenses. How was this even possible?
The scans agree with the statement from the humans,
Zova replied, as efficient with her information as ever. She hadn't made a secret about being as unhappy with the result as Kaziz himself was, but he only had himself to blame. He had, after all, taken into his employment a pair of individuals known to have brought destruction to a well-protected Kortai core world, and hadn't explicitly told them not to destroy every last thing.
They've also managed to return with a Kortai defector, Kaziz continued,
completely flabbergasted by the fact.
War Counselor Herbiter of the Dominion, no less.
The intelligence reports mark him as a criminal working against the Kortai Directorate,
Zova said.
He's probably just fleeing imprisonment, rather than coming over to our side because he agrees with us.
He hasn't come over to our side, though, Kaziz replied. He's gone over to the humans. They just happen to be working for us right now, and NJ insists that they'll be very unhappy if we try and take their resource from them.
There are only 2 of the humans,
Zova protested.
There's no reason to do what they demand.
Kaziz was incredulous.
No reason? You call what they did to Cimbrian no reason? Adjutant, I am not afraid to admit that I am not inclined to make such people angry with me.
There hadn't been a lot of information gleaned from the humans about the details of their assault, but the matter-of-fact way that NJ, a name she seemed to wish to stick with, had informed them about what had been done had been enough, especially when combined with what the scans revealed.
They have asked me if we have any more work for them,
Kaziz continued.
It is difficult to find a valid reason to deny them.
Mass slaughter isn't a valid reason,
Zova asked.
What would they possibly need to do if that is not enough?
Clucking his lament, Kaziz considered how best to explain it. So few Gefka, or any other species for that matter, could appreciate the political intricacies of this kind of situation, and in spite of her intelligence, Zova was not amongst them.
Alliance Command will not see it that way, he said. They will see a brilliantly successful mission with all the casualties on the other side. They will see a way to use these humans, and we both know what even a single human can do to change the course of this war.
You're speaking of the Ultra Harnesses?
She surmised. The origin of those pieces of equipment was not unknown to most officers. The series of brutal defeats that had been suffered in the initial days of their deployment were widely talked about. It had been a stroke of luck that the Alliance had managed to seize a shipment so early on, and the rapid construction and deployment of their own was a powerful testament to Alliance ingenuity.
So there really is?
That and other things, he said. There used to be rules in this war. We have a human to thank for turning it into what it is today.
So there really is no choice?
She asked, but by her tone, he could tell it wasn't really a question.
Thanks to those pirates, the war is at a critical stage, Kaziz replied. We cannot afford to give up such a potent tool simply because we have morals.
He didn't bother to think about where that kind of argument could take him. He knew it wasn't anywhere good, and if he didn't keep thinking of the greater good, he would be unable to do whatever needed doing.
I've decided, he said. Have them allowed back aboard. Give them clothes, food, and proper rooms, although I want them under guard at all times. And hopefully they'll feel enough gratitude that they won't turn butcher on whoever else we meet.
He wished he could be sure, but it wasn't as though he had much choice in keeping them on. The only thing he could do was hope his morals could rub off on a pair of Deathworld savages, and, for what they were worth, he could hope to pass along his good intentions. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one today. I hope you enjoyed this one. I really appreciate you being here with me. I know that your time is valuable, and I'm glad you choose to spend it here with me. We appreciate you flying, Zren Airlines, and we hope you'll choose us again next time. Thank you, and we'll see you again in the next one. Alright. Bye, guys.